Wow, Harry, your first greeting is from an international guest. How wonderful is that? Lovely to have Nepal. Lovely to have Nepal in the room in South Africa.
Just a sound check as well for everybody joining. We're just admitting more people into the session. We start in as soon as possible.
Good afternoon, Mr. Harry.
Good day.
I'm looking from Nepal.
Good morning. Welcome all the way from Nepal.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Thank you.
So, colleagues, it is a Monday morning. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to step into the virtual space, and then Harry will be kicking off. Maybe whilst we're waiting, I'm going to invite you to use the participant list, find your own name and rename yourself with your first name and the organization you might be representing here this morning, just so that when you speak, we have a good sense of who's in the room. So if you've just joined, if you can find your own name on the participant list, click rename, your first name and the organization you might be representing here this morning. I know I've seen colleagues from City of Cape Town, City of Tshwane, so it would be lovely that we have a sense of where you might be joining us from. Shona Koop, Susan, lovely to see Shona Koop here as well.
Morning, everybody. It's great seeing all the faces again this morning. It's obviously Monday morning, the 18th of March, and we're privileged in having a lot of people still joining the session. But while we joining people into the session, let's do a little bit housekeeping, and that is, please remember to keep yourselves on mute. We will make sure that in mute you should have too many background noises. And then also remember there's a chat room. You're welcome to use the chat room to make your comments there later on in the session when Rihanna is facilitating. Obviously, we will manage, who's going to say when and what, and be able to unmute. And once you've been recognized, then you'll be able to talk as well. So thank you very much. It's also a sound check for everybody joining the session. And yeah, we as Transport Forum, we are very pleased and privileged to be able to host this session. And I just want to put up our program for today. So there's our program, and it's all about the draft National Public Transport Subsidy Policy and the public participation on the 18th of March. And you can see we're proudly being hosted by Department of Transport. The Transport Forum, interesting sake, it is this month the Transport Forum's birthday. We are 17 years old. And it's now the 251st Transport Forum event over these 17 years. But you can see, I'm not going to run to the program. Rihanna will do that just now. I just want to give recognition for the sponsors and alliance partners of the Transport Forum who's making the Transport Forum possible. There they are. We've got a platinum sponsor, C-Track. Has been part of the transport actually from since inception. You can see here the top layer there. We've got professional industry bodies who are formally in alliance to the Transport Forum. We've got in the middle there, you can see we've got media houses formally aligned. And then at the bottom there, we've got a lot of gold sponsors. And obviously, there are many other companies involved as well, but these are in a formal agreement with the Transport Forum. So we're very thankful for them making the Transport Forum possible. All right, and then, ladies and gents, all the presentations for Transport Forum, including today's event, and you will also find for today's event, there will be a technical document, a gazetted one, and the simplified documents for this event will be uploaded to this website, transportseek.com. And all of you after this event will also receive an email, sharing information about the links that you can use. But, should you visit that website, you will see to the left of your screen, there's a user login. So the user login you can use to log in before you can download presentations. Should you not been, registered as an account holder with the Transport Forum, it's all complimentary. Then you can click on sign up, and the sign up option then will take you through this simple little registration process, and you'll be able to then log in. And then you go to events and you go down to downloads, and then you should be able to access the little search engine. Very simple to use. There are two fields. The top field, you can just type in a topic or a title or a date or whatever, and hit search, and it'll bring up all the presentations presented over this past 17 years that you can download presentations. There are more than 900 of those presentations, one of the strongest knowledge bases for transport. Or you can go to category, and if you select category, it should give you the days of the Transport Forum events, and you hit search and it'll bring up the day's presentations, and you can download. All complimentary and very powerful. So ladies and gents, that takes us back to our program, and I would like to introduce you to Jefiwa from Department of Transport, who's going to do the welcome on behalf of Department of Transport. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone on the call. My name is Chipiwa Muzirwana from the National Department of Transport, Public Transport Branch. Thank you, Mr. Harry, for hosting us as the Department of Transport. We really appreciate it. The department saw a need to develop a national public transport subsidy policy. As you know, that we don't have such a policy. But we're distributing grants or subsidies. We then appointed the Future of Transport Consulting towards the end of 2018. I think it was in October. Then we started early consultation in 2019, I think Jan, Feb. Then from there, we were interrupted by COVID-19, as we all know. That was in March 20, it was the end of March 2020. Then we couldn't do physical consultations. Then the first consultations that we did led us to the first draft of the policy, which was then further consulted with some key stakeholders. I think we also used this forum And then the second draft was then issued in October 2021. Then this led us to the presentations through the cabinet clusters that led to cabinet approving for the policy to be published for general or wider stakeholder comments. And then it was gazetted on the 23rd of Feb, as you saw in the Gazette. And then it is closing on the 31st of March this year. Then the comments may be sent through, as you saw on the first page of the Gazette, to the dedicated email, which is subsidypolicy@dot.gov.za, subsidypolicy@dot.gov.za, or it can be emailed or sent via post to the Director General of the Department of Transport. And then you can also hand deliver it at 159 Struben Street at the Department of Transport. I think the team, FOT, as I indicated earlier, will be leading the presentation and the stakeholder consultation session. We'll be listening from the department. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Chifiwa. And wonderful to see many old friends and new faces and names in the room. My name is Rehana. I am part of the drafting team from Future of Transport Consulting. Harry and Transport Forum, thank you very much for so gracefully agreeing to host this forum in partnership with the Department of Transport. And we're super excited that you have all made it here on a Monday morning in what is a short week in South Africa. It is Human Rights Week this week, and the 21st of March will be Human Rights Day. So colleagues, I'm going to be facilitating the session and going to request you, firstly, just to find, some of you have already done that, to find your own name in the participant list. Click on rename, your first name and an organization you might be representing here. So I see Rian is from Green Square Consulting. Abby is here from Pegasus. I think earlier I greeted Susan from Shonaquip. They do amazing work in the disability sector. So if you've just joined, please do put your first name and your organization. Terry is here from Saboa. Lovely to have you in the room. I'm seeing Kathy Bell just coming in. I know Kathy is from Standard Bank. So colleagues, if you could give us a sense of who you are, and then I am just going to take a moment to introduce my colleagues who you will see, and I'm going to ask all of the FOT team, if you could please just put your cameras on for a few minutes so that people can see you. That would be great. Thank you, Darko. Dr. Mateta Mokonyama, part of the drafting team, Darko Skribinsik, the CEO of Future of Transport Consulting, and Zain Randri should also be here. Zain is the legal member of the team, Nanette Mwamba, who is the support member of the FOT team, and our colleague who may not be in the session this morning, Dr. Jonathan Bloom, who is a transport economist who has been very much a part of the drafting team. So the work we bring you this morning is really part of a collective and a process, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments, but we're really keen to get a sense of who exactly is in the room. So Harry is going to do a poll with two simple questions and going to invite you all to please complete the poll so that we have some sense of your proximity to issues of subsidy and your understanding or your familiarity with the document that has been gazetted. So my knowledge of the draft public transport subsidy policy is, and we're using traffic lights, red, amber, or green. And if you could please complete that part of the poll. So we have one vote in yet. Gonna invite you to, we have some people with green, 3 with amber. I'm so glad there are people who are honest enough to say, I haven't exactly engaged this document, so my knowledge is red. Given that our traffic lights don't function that well with load shedding, it's kind of nice to just be reintroduced to traffic lights all over again. Okay, we have a number of votes coming in now. 7 of us say red, my knowledge of the public transport subsidy policy, some 20 or 19 on amber, some 7 on green. Drafting team members, I'm assuming you're voting, so I hope you're the green people, amongst others. Okay, we'll give it just a few more seconds. Okay, we've got some 71 people in the room, a high number of votes, 24 on amber, 14 on red. We're still sitting at 7 on green, 25 amber. Okay, I think, Harry, we can close the poll. And thank you very much for playing along on a Monday morning. Thank you, Nokatula, for introducing yourself in the chat there. A Master's of Engineer in Transport Studies and worked on transport regulation. And I think I'm going to ask the rest of you to do the same. If you would just type into the chat box what it is that has brought you into this meeting. I mean, we have a guest all the way from Nepal. Who has opted. I'm also seeing, I saw Chris Cost earlier from ITDP, and I know that Chris is sitting out in Nairobi. So if you would just give us a sense using the chat function on Zoom of why it is that you have taken 3 precious hours on a Monday morning to join this session on the draft subsidy policy. It would be wonderful to get your feedback in the chat. And the question you're answering is why I have taken 3 precious hours out of my life and out of my work week to be in this session. And I'm also going to ask if it's okay, given that we now have these AI companions, Harry, over and above the recording, if we could use the AI companion that will then give us some sense of what it is that we've been saying. Okay, and we're now having people say to us, Lizelle, you're representing PUTCO, you're a current operator in the commuter transport sector, the business development manager, and obviously an interest from PUTCO, who currently do receive subsidy. It's understandable that the business development manager is here. Susan, your special interest in first, last mile transport of the public transport chain and in rural areas. Lovely to have someone who has an interest in rural areas for people with disabilities. Thank you so much for joining us. Elsie, you from DOT, the ITP branch. And of course, there's such strong linkages between the integrated transport plans and this draft subsidy policy. So it makes absolute sense that you are here. Would love to hear from some others as to why you have chosen. Lokendra, I know that you're joining us from really far away, so I'll allow others to use the chat, but why don't we allow your voice into the session to give us a sense of why you've chosen to join this session. Lokendra, you can unmute and introduce yourself. Lokendra, you can unmute. I see we've got Moulton Schumer from DOT Eastern Cape. Lovely to have Eastern Cape in the room. Nobutle, who particularly works with Centalco. Lovely to have you in the room, Nobutle. Lokendra, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. First of all, greetings, everyone from Nepal. My name is Lokendra Samsathapa, and I'm very excited to join this transport platform because I'm from Nepal. So we have many issues in logistic transport area. So from your expertise, I can put my this effort to my work areas, so it will be better for Nepalese logistic management system. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lukendra. Lovely to have you here. I'm seeing Nakwanda, who's a researcher from Property Point, an incubator organization that works with small businesses in the property and construction sector. Fascinating to have you in the room. Philip from Pegasus. Obviously, you're saying policy relevant to many of Pegasus projects. Absolutely. Hanifa, lovely to have National Treasury. And of course, we know, Hanifa, that later this week, CSP and South African Cities Network will be jointly organizing a dedicated session for municipalities. So lovely to have the public transport lead from City Support Program in the space. And then we've got Minke from Stellenbosch University. So we've got academia amongst us as well. We have Alison, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Pretoria doing research in public transportation. So really delighted by the mix of people, and please keep them coming in. But we're going to kind of move on with the program. And I trust now that Harry and Chifiwa have welcomed you, now that you've done the traffic light check, now that we have some sense of who's in the room, we're really able to begin to move into the draft policy. So I need to say this right, because my colleague at legal will remind me that it is the draft national public transport subsidy policy that we are talking about this morning. And of course, it is draft, has been gazetted, it is open for public comment. And what we want to do this morning is give you some sense, which I will be doing. So we'll be sharing the high-level overview of the draft policy between myself, Darko, and Mateta. And then we'll take a little bit of a comfort break, because I know people think that when we get onto Zoom calls, that we are machines, but we're not. And people do need a comfort break. Hanifa and I won't be getting any coffee. I trust the rest of you will. And then we'll come back really to engage, and we want to invite you to engage in a conversation with the drafting team, with the DOT, as we collectively try to work through the real challenges that face public transport funding in our country, and how together we can begin to see a different future for public transport funding, and subsidy in particular. So at this point, I am going to try to share my screen. And Harry, can you confirm that you can see this?
Not yet, Rihanna, we're waiting.
Not yet. Okay, I think I might not have done the technical thing of saying share screen. Can you see it now?
Just go presentation mode, slide mode.
Going to do. Okay.
We can see it.
Great. Thank you, Harry. So colleagues, as we've indicated, we are in a session on the draft National Public Transport Subsidy Policy, which was gazetted on the 23rd of February, 2024. It's currently open for public comments. And I want to say, as you've heard Chifiwa indicate, that this document that has been gazetted, some of you in this room have been part of a long process that started with the first formal session out at the Manhattan Hotel in February 2019. And the document gives you a list, in fact, of consultations that have happened in person, online. And between February 2019 and the gazetting of the document, almost 40 sessions were held. In fact, Harry, I think there was a session also where the team presented at the Transport Forum. And we've covered a very wide range of stakeholders. So we have chatted to operators, bus operators through SABOA. We have chatted to small bus operators. We have chatted to the taxi industry. We have chatted to provinces. We have spoken to professionals in a session that we hosted at the CSIR. We have invited in academia. We had created 2 little video documents, video clips, one called The Building Blocks of the Subsidy Policy, one called A Deep Dive. And we had invited in, Chris, I know that ITDP and some others who are on this call had commented in that original round of calls for submission in that Google Doc. And then in November 2023, the team at DOT were able to take the draft to Cabinet. Cabinet then approved for a public participation process, which was kicked off, obviously, with the gazetting of the document. But that consultative process, and I think it's important to say that the drafting team have not sat in a corner somewhere and put together their own ideas. They've really been in conversation and engagement with a range of colleagues and viewpoints and contestation and debate. And that has yielded 3 documents. It has yielded the document that has been gazetted and that has been shared with you in the invitation to this meeting. It has also yielded a very comprehensive and detailed technical document. Now, I am definitely not the technical person in the team, so I can absolutely say that my understanding of the technical document is read, and is likely to stay read for a long time. But of course, people like Mateta and Darko and others on our team understand that technical document very well. And then we've also, for people like me, created a simplified version of the document for lay people who really get freaked out when they see maps and graphs and all kinds of things, just to understand some of the core principles of this document. And all 3 of these documents will in fact be made available to all attendees of the session. So I think one of the issues, and you will hear more about this from Darko and Mateta in a little while, but those of you who are transport experts, you are not new to the trade-offs that have to be made when we focus and bring front and center either social considerations, economic considerations, or environmental considerations. And that balancing those 3, that whilst we're talking about a draft subsidy policy, but getting the balance right between those components. And we've heard Shona Koop say they work with rural transport in particular, that if we were only looking at economic issues, it's very easy to focus on the urban. But this is a national subsidy policy. It does need to, in fact, focus on the country and all of its people. And so the team have really been grappling with balancing all of this and what it takes to fulfill the vision for an efficient, safe, reliable, affordable, convenient, and comfortable public transport system. And I guess no one on this call debates how essential public transport and mobility, walking, non-motorized transport are for a productive society and economy. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Darko Skribincic, one of the drafting team members, a transport engineer, the CEO of FOT Consulting. Darko will take some of the slides and he will then transition over to Mateta. Darko, over to you.
Thank you, Rihanna. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session. Rihanna has given really the foundation of, or basically some of the critical aspects of the background to the policy. Maybe just to, in the next few slides, we will highlight further background things and maybe historical things that have been relatively detailed, touched in detail in the documents themselves. And we will not go through that in detail, but just to give you the context of how we approach developing the state policy statements and proposals going forward. So maybe just to highlight, go back, Rihanna, just to highlight that essentially as much as the subsidy exists for a couple of decades in South Africa, there has never been a policy to guide the actual public transport subsidy. What we are referring to at this point in time is a subsidy, public transport subsidy regime. And it has been in existence for a couple of decades. And then in 2021, updated white paper on national transport policy has been gazetted, and specifically referred to the requirement to develop a guideline or policy document regarding the public transport subsidies in order to regulate basically what has been going on for quite a while in the country. And the DOT team can always can also add to it that every time when they go to National Treasury for subsidy budget, there's always a question why this much and where it comes from and rationale for it. So we don't have that rationale at this point in time, and one of the key objectives is to prepare and create that rationale for the public transport subsidy in the future. Okay, we can go down. Diana, can you go down slide?
Yeah, Darko, I'm trying for some reason. It's not moving. Let me just try to reshare. I'm not sure why it's doing this. Let's try it again. It seems to have gotten stuck on that slide, Darko. I'll just reshare the full presentation. Okay, Harry, are you sharing now? Okay, it seems to be fine. Okay.
Okay. So as already Rihanna to some degree mentioned, is basically that we are trying to find a balance in terms of how the public transport funding and subsidy is going to be approached and how it's going to be allocated. And we have done some exercises, call it modeling or projection exercises, in if we are to emphasize certain social, economic, and environmental issues or aspects, how would allocation of subsidies would yield or would look like geographically in South Africa. But essentially, the aim is that that allocation of subsidy in the future would be on the basis of the area or planning region contributing to the attainment of sustainable transport objectives. So we have quite a few referencing to sustainability of the built environment, and we have tried to locate and place the subsidy to also respond to the sustainability objectives of the built environment. You can go down. Maybe just to illustrate how the current subsidy is being allocated and what is this current subsidy reach. I mean, you can see on the screen a couple of references. When you look at population perspective, only 1.6% of the people get to the subsidy, or this is equivalent to 4.2% of the labor force, or 7.4% of the persons who use public transport daily, or 2.3% of persons making some form of travel on a daily basis. So we can see that its current subsidy reach is very, very narrow. And in the documents, we have included some maps showing basically how geographically that looks, and it's in principle majority of the subsidies allocated to the couple of metros in the country, and that's something that we need to address going forward. You can go down. As I mentioned, I think we, as especially transport fraternity, and planning fraternity, we would be probably aware of quite a few sustainability factors that play a major role in our planning efforts. We know that there are 17 sustainability development goals that have been also recognized by the National Development Plan, and we have been trying to, in this creating this subsidy policy to fit into these sustainable development goals. Hence, these few major references to the sustainability development, like a reduction of consumption of natural resources, requirement to minimize input costs, achieving mobility goals, support reduction of spatial imbalance, and improve affordability, especially for low-income households. I think generally there has been a fair amount of talk and expectations that usually references we should aim at a user-targeted subsidy policy, and even white paper on transport references user-targeted policy, and that is something that has to be also understood and interpreted properly, because subsidizing users directly, it's usually what is meant. It means that the funds would be allocated to people directly, which not necessarily is easy process, and it basically not that even internationally we don't have such a case that is done successfully and sustainably. So looking all that basically is what we are looking at as from a sustainability perspective. Yeah, we can carry on, Harry. And maybe go down as well. Maybe the last reference to the background and introduction to the policy. We have looked at how the funding of the public transport works at this point in time, and it's what we basically found out. We can go down the slide, Harry. That public transport funding is equivalent to about below 1% of the GDP at this stage. We know that its subsidy is usually divided or allocated according to the transport modes between rail, bus, and basically minibus taxi to very minimum. So basically, the majority of the public transport subsidy is allocated between the rail, about 56%, and buses 43%. We're also aware of quite a considerable challenges that we have, especially in the rail sector, where the rail patronage has dropped down significantly for the last couple of decades. The bus industry remained relatively stable over the time, but all in all, also what is also extremely important to understand and to recognize that road accident funding is quite considerable. In fact, its total funding is much higher than public transport funding itself. It's about 3.5% of the GDP. So I think this understanding of this current funding approach, and also being fairly fragmented due to the also institutional setup and organization in the country, it is kind of evident that public transport planning going forward is not really geared to be sustainable for now. Hence, we have taken all that into account. So all these background references and understanding the bit of a history of where subsidy comes from, understanding the problems that we are facing in a daily and continuous planning engagements, has given us enough basis to basically see how do we actually propose going forward. And that is basically being formulated and articulated through the proposed key policy principles and policy statements. And Mateta will now take over and take us through what is being proposed in the policy document. Thank you.
Yeah, Darko, thanks. I'm gonna suggest, Mateta, before you come in, maybe let's just pause and check, based on the background that we've given, whether there are any questions from colleagues on the background, so that when we go into discussion later, we really focus on the heart of the policy issues. So you've had a sense of the background between myself and Darko. I'll note hands, so you can just go, I think, to reactions and raise your hand if you have any questions on the background. Okay, so Titus is putting in the chat box, how is 1% of taxi subsidy funded? So there's a question about the 1% of taxi subsidy. Anyone else with a question specifically on the background slides? So the kind of grappling that the drafting team had to do, the things they had to balance and weigh up, the current subsidy regime and who it's serving. Any further questions on the background? Going once? Does this include deficit funding of municipal transport services and the BRTs? Is Rian's question. Do we know how much of the rail subsidy goes to PRASA versus Gautrain? Is Chris's question. Going once? Going twice? So Mateta, I'm going to ask you to weave responses in, because these questions kind of, I think, are very much about the detail of the policy. So as you present, if you could also then deal with this, but it feels like the background, there are no specific questions on the background. These ones start getting into the content. So Harry, we can come up back at slide, I think it was 9 or 10, where Mateta will pick up from where Darko was. Thank you. Mateta, over to you.
Right. Thanks, Rihanna, and good morning to colleagues in South Africa. And I don't know what time it is in other parts of the world, but good day. Yes, I'll try to also address some of the questions that have been raised as part of the unpacking of the detail. So on the foundational elements of the draft policy, one of the key things, as mentioned, is sustainability. And in this regard, every rand of expenditure paid for public transport must set in motion a better life for both present and future generations. So this is very important, that you want to weigh what a rand of expenditure does. So the proposals that you make, what does it do relative to the alternative? So something to keep in mind. Relative to the alternative, what does this rand of expenditure, what does it do? And the favor has been to advance equity, intragenerational equity, and intergenerational equity. And we'll get to that, in a moment. And another thing is capital subsidy is part of this. And this is quite important because of the structural backlog. We have a unique situation in the country where public transport has got a massive structural backlog. Public transport has, in the past, as documented, never really been about services, a good service. It was about just, transporting, workers to a large extent, and also, creating convenience, for certain households that may not have access to a car. But it was never really deliberately about service quality. And as a result, the investment in the infrastructure has always lagged behind. So we've got a massive backlog that we're facing. So part of this subsidy policy does, address issues of capital subsidy. And then another thing is basing the subsidy or the subsidy payments investment on transport plans. It is quite key that the government wants to subsidize on the basis of transport plans. Like the policy has always said, that any action, any investment that we make in transport needs to be guided by transport plans, statutory transport plans. And in that regard, I want to remind you of the Constitutional Court ruling some years ago that elevated the nature or the status of municipal plans, let me say. In that case, it was the integrated development plan, to say that there's no sphere of government, national, provincial, that should undermine, that can undermine, should be undermining essentially the statutory municipal plans. So that gives you an extent of how important municipal planning, statutory municipal planning is in the bigger scheme of things. So the policy says that there needs to be a transport plan for the investment subsidy to be applied. And then there's also an aspect of operational subsidy that is biased mainly towards providing relief to poorer persons, as defined in the policy, living below minimum living level. And then another thing is also to make a point that it is not an instantaneous, it's not a big bang approach. It is to phase things in. So you'll see the use of continuous present tense. Those who know English probably have better phrases. So it is continuously improving. So it is not about having big bang approach, is about showing that there is progress. You want to finance, you want to fund, you want to subsidize progress. Okay, I can move on. All right. The other points to also make, also underpinned by the white paper on national transport policy, the revised white paper, is that you want to improve optimization of existing funding schemes. So you want to optimize what you have. You want to remove leakages as far as it is possible, consolidate as far as it is possible, especially the human or the built environment grants. That is what Treasury has always been pushing, and that is what also the Financial and Fiscal Commission has also been pushing, to say that there are all these things, that grants that are quite efficiently applied. To what extent can we fuse these things to make sure that every round of expenditure gives us more, and then also to harmonize policy instruments, and in that to recognize that there are multiple policy instruments that are there, and you want to make sure that you finance them, you fund them together. So instead of having policy on greening that is isolated from the subsidy policy, you want to bring them together, because they are about improving sustainability of mobility, essentially. And you also want to also improve accountability. That comes out quite strong in the policy, in that you want to make sure that you subsidize on the basis that there is accountability. This is in contrast to what is currently happening or historically been happening, in that you finance, you fund, you subsidize because you've always done so. All right. And then very important also is that this is very important. The last statement there, that you optimize, you remove leakages, but there's also a need. There's also a need to bring in new money. We're dealing with a massive backlog. We're dealing with a large population that is disadvantaged, the economy that is disadvantaged, the economy that each kilometer, every passenger kilometer that is in the system is actually more expensive than it should be, and it's at the expense of society. So you want to bring in money, investment, to make sure that the one rand of expenditure essentially it creates efficiencies. in the system. So new money to create those efficiencies going forward. Okay.
Mateta, before you proceed, this session is also being live streamed on YouTube. And Valeen Manuel, Valeen, been a long time since I've heard from you. So Valeen on the YouTube channel has posed a question, and I think it's important that maybe we just make this very clear at this stage. Valeen's question is, thank you for the draft policy. What percentage for taxi versus bus on the subsidy? And I think you'll be addressing that as you go, but I just want Valeen to know that we've heard what she's raised on the YouTube channel. And in fact, Valeen, this draft subsidy policy is actually moving away from a modal approach to subsidy. And Mateta will explain what that shift actually is that is being proposed. Mateta, over to you.
All right. Okay, I'll move a bit more so that we have more time to discuss, but also to bring to the attention of colleagues that there are definitions that are there that we just need to remind ourselves of what is public transport, what is subsidy as defined. There are terminology relating to public transport service contracts. And then there is a white paper on national transport policy, which actually has created a foundation for what is being presented. Also, the historical, need to guide, funding, public transport funding in particular. So all of these things are informing what is being presented. Okay. Okay, again, key principles. One, public transport supply will not be left to the free market, very important. The policy says one of the key principles is that government will not leave public transport to free market forces, essentially. If you look at one of the diagrams in the document, the base document, it shows that there are large parts of the country where mobility is under, subsidized, essentially. And households, people in those areas will ask, what is this message? What are you saying about us? They are saying that, what are you saying about a municipality somewhere in the Northern Cape, a municipality somewhere in the Eastern Cape, so forth, in Limpopo, has absolutely nothing, and they're asking what is happening? What is this thing? What is it saying? So market forces. If you leave it to market forces, that essentially is what happens. So the policy is driven by government. And then number two, subsidy allocation must finance specific transport goals and sustainable development goals. Very important. That it is not about fund or subsidizing for the sake of subsidizing. It is outcomes based. So you want to subsidize to achieve something, to achieve an outcome. So it's outcomes based, not I have always applied so much, 1 billion in this province, and therefore I'll continue doing 1 billion, or increase it by inflation, or whatever alternative thinking around the maintaining the historical trend. It's about saying, what do we want to achieve in the network mobility, and then it needs to be incentivized through the allocation. Number three, importance of subsidy correcting special imbalances as well as affordability of services. Again, given our special history in South Africa, we cannot ignore this. Part of the outcomes is to deliberately make sure that we finance plans that are geared towards improving special efficiencies. And then four, capitalize the public transport network at an appropriate rate. The point that was made earlier to say that given the massive backlogs, you want to then make sure that you invest such that you address the inefficiencies of the infrastructure. at an appropriate rate. Okay.
Mateta, you have 20 minutes left.
And then the transport system performance benchmarks. One of the things that the policy proposes is a number of benchmarks. As in the white paper says that there needs to be targets, policy targets that you want to achieve. So there are targets that have been set and also weighted. So minimizing system input costs would be one of those, minimizing environmental impact, reducing travel time, and others. So essentially, these are the metrics that when you plan as a planning authority, you show that I am planning to achieve these things. So then the funding, the allocation is based on showing that the implementation, the plan is being implemented towards achieving these outcomes. There are elements relating to safety, elements relating to the cost of transport to society, and then the speed of transport. I'll touch a bit on that, the speed of transport, network speed, and the target being minimum 40 kilometers per hour during the peak. Now, what this means is that how you plan is not about just buses or taxis or rail. It's about creating a network that produces that speed outcome. So rail, for example, definitely in urban areas would have to really play a very important role to be able to increasingly achieve that kind of target. So touching on the earlier point, taxi versus bus is not about bus versus taxi versus rail. It's about the network. A planning authority, plans in order to achieve, specific outcomes indicated in the transport policy. This is very important. So you want to have a planning authority that demonstrates that they are moving towards achieving those outcomes. So in broadly, it's really about mobility, improving mobility and making sure that you incentivize, sustainable mobility overall. Okay, next, Hannah. And then it further goes on to, trip lengths. That's where spatial transformation comes in, and also issues of expenditure on transport, universal access. You want to show that there is an element of acceptability of the service by persons with disabilities as one of the components of universal access. For example, having surveys showing that at least 80% of persons indicate that they are able to use public transport without difficulty. And the other metrics, so all weighted as policy targets. Okay, can move on. Okay, and then there are 8 policy statements that are being presented in the document. So I'll go through each of these statements, and then that will be the end. So public transport subsidies will be implemented to achieve specific goals in transport plans, as indicated. So for each statement, let me just orientate. For each statement, there's a statement on the left, you'll see, and then there will be a block that talks about the gaps that are being addressed through that statement. And then the implications, some of the implications, and then some of the benefits that are being envisaged with that statement. So the first one being public transport will be implemented to achieve specific goals. So it's outcomes based. Again, it's about being clear about why you're doing it. Why are you doing it? And then, so it becomes more purpose driven transformative. And if something is being informed by plans, transport plans inherently are supposed to be informed by community participation. So part of this would be to make sure that that voice is being carried. And then also the main benefit is to make sure that you achieve specific goals, developmental goals that are clear. And then statement number 2, can go on. Public transport subsidies will be managed by municipalities. This is very important and often a source of contention. And this is nothing new. The policy clearly says that contracting authorities, municipalities will become contracting authorities, will become planning authorities, will have essentially functions that define what services, the quality services that need to be delivered. So you cannot be a contracting authority, you cannot be a planning authority, and something else happens in your area that you have no influence over. So the gap being addressed is that you want to essentially address the biggest gap, which is municipalities largely currently have no say on the quality of service that is being offered when the constitution, when the transport policy overall essentially says that they are supposed to be doing that. So what this means is that municipalities need to take their responsibility very seriously and create capacity to be able to do so. And there also needs to be targeted capacitation of municipalities, and the plans will then be funded appropriately in order to achieve specific outcomes. One of the statements made by certain stakeholders is that municipalities don't have capacity to do so. But you cannot create policy on the basis of something that is operational, something that should be solved. You can't say because some municipalities don't have capacity, we stopped doing what we're supposed to be doing. There are mechanisms in the constitution, mechanism in law to make sure that the capacity is created. Municipal Systems Act also offers a huge opportunity for municipalities, local government to be able to create that kind of capacity. We can talk about it in the discussions. Okay, statement number 3. Public transport will be cost recovery based. So essentially you want to incentivize productivity, eliminate operational efficiencies. So again, part of being having those targets is to make sure that you're able to cost recover and to incentivize innovation. So having outcomes-based goals, you want to give enough space for planning authorities, contracting authorities to be a lot more creative with the solutions that they bring on board, as opposed to being prescriptive about what to do in the network. All right. Then the next statement, number 4, is public transport subsidy will consist of both operational and capital support. We've touched on it earlier, that there is the gap is that some municipalities currently are not being funded. There's a massive backlog. You want to be addressing that. Implications with this is that, something else very important is the current regime. The last point in the first block there, current approach restrains small operators to entering into the contracted market. So if I'm a small operator, I want to be an operator. I often have to essentially have this massive capital to show that I'm able to acquire this fleet, massive capital to acquire fleet. But when you look at the formula, the actual subsidy formula, it shows that the state government is actually paying for the capital funding for all this fleet, but then ultimately the fleet is actually being owned by the operator. But small operator wanting to come in, they are being there's a hurdle, a massive hurdle that they have to overcome to be able to come in and operate. So part of what the subsidy says is that an operator needs to be an operator, and the state will bring in the infrastructure that will then be operated by an operator who will be contracted. So similar to what we see with railways, Gautrain, and other services, the state owns the infrastructure, and that will be contracted, and then the contractor, the operator, then operates that which is owned by the state. And some of the benefits there would be leveraging on the buying power of the state. We have things like the automotive industry master plan, which wants to increase local content from 37% to 60%. So part of that is to say, how do we make sure that the state implements that master plan through this policy, for example. Okay. Number 5, operating subsidy will increasingly be administered through information technology. I think this is self-explanatory, essentially to say that a lot of the targeting that is requires that we use information technology to know who is who that is being targeted. We have sufficiently mature technology, to be able to do that. It's generally a matter of embracing it and then implementing accordingly. Okay, number 6. And then differentiation of urban and rural areas. Currently, there are, unexplained gaps between funding between, urban and rural. The regime at the moment is biased towards, urban areas at the expense of rural areas. And there are specific allocations made to rural areas and others to urban areas, the splits. And again, it's about transport plans. Any municipality can receive allocation to fund its public transport on the basis of the quality of the plan and those targets that have been set. The benefits there, public transport operators in rural areas will be able to balance their viabilities accordingly. One of the things that you want to address with this differentiation is the conditions in rural areas are such that you inherently have higher costs. The densities are low. Often the road conditions for road-based services, the conditions are poorer. So part of the subsidy is to make sure that you address those backlogs, to make sure that the operational costs are minimized as much as it is possible. So you won't structurally disadvantage rural municipalities, going forward. And then number 7, more specific financing. You do away with more specific financing, to say bus subsidy, taxi subsidy, rail subsidy. So you want to subsidize goals. I think at the heart of this is to say that let's go to the heart of what subsidy is. It's about a person. It's about mobility. It's not about an operator. It is not about yes, an operator. It's not about protecting vested interest. It's about maximizing, stretching the rand so that the beneficiary actually has got maximum benefit from the from subsidy. So you want to do away with more specific financing and finance outcomes on the basis of plans that have been put together by planning authorities and to be contracted by contracted authorities. So again, the plans become quite important in this case. Earlier, the question was raised about the 1% of taxes being funded at the moment. So the estimations in the document, the base document, look at what we essentially refer to as a direct and indirect policy. If you look at minibus taxes at the moment, there is some subsidization with regard to taxi recap. There is some subsidization with regard to the use of land for free. We take that into account in terms of how much land time they use, unpaid land. And then we also have the cost of crashes allocated particularly to minibus taxes. We allocate it per kilometer on a per kilometer basis. So we essentially estimate that is about 1%. That the taxi sector essentially benefits at the moment. So another question was on the deficit funding. Yes, this is all. If you look at the base document, so all the flows. There's a document. There's a diagram that shows all the flows at the moment. How all these flows come together. Deficit funding in municipal-owned services, equitable share that is being spent by provinces, their own equitable share to subsidize, the cow train, all of this. So the flow is shown, but going forward, much of the power actually rests with, the planning authorities, of course, contracting authorities, which are essentially municipalities, going forward. Statement number 8. Governance and administration. Gaps, challenges that will be addressed with regard to this is that state will move away from being an operator. State at the moment is involved as an operator through several rail and bus operating entities in the country. And that creates conflict of interest and vested interest and so forth. So as the policy has stated, move away from having a state being an operator. State owns the infrastructure. Operators operate that which is being contracted by the state. So no state entities should be involved as operators, but the government owns the infrastructure. And you then contract, operators to operate that which is owned by the state. There you create a healthy governance, administration, improve governance, and then you create, efficiencies. You improve also innovation in the system going forward. Right. Then we can move on. So again, the enabling interventions, just to conclude, transport plans as indicated, subsidy linked to approved transport plans. We want to link that. Now, someone might ask about mechanisms. How do you do that? Now, the National Land Transport Act empowers the minister to create regulations. So, you can create regulatory mechanisms to implement the subsidy policy. You don't have to create, other things, other legislation. The legislation that we have at the moment empowers the minister to create, regulations, essentially that implement current legislation. Operational subsidy, looking at 5-year horizon, capital subsidy 10-year, subject to annual reviews. Funding of public transport, very important. Also, you want to optimize, of course, and remove leakages. But an important statement that is made in the policy is that the subsidy should be to the tune of equivalent of 5% of GDP. So if you look at road crashes cost the country 3.5% of GDP. And then there are other things. At the moment, public transport is funded to the tune of, as indicated, 0.76% of GDP, and it's been declining. So if you want to address the backlogs, if you want to create sustainability, the proposal is to phase it to 5% of GDP. Why that is the case is explained in the document, particularly in the technical document. And then there's a subsidy formula that is being proposed, 40% of category B and C municipalities. And then again, on the basis of a number of metrics, trip densities being a key in the allocation between rural and urban, or type A and type B and C municipalities. Okay. And then there are, responsibilities, national sphere. Nothing really changes. National sphere does what it does. Provincial sphere, largely to make sure that there is capacity being created in local government to do what is necessary. And then the municipal sphere, takes a large chunk of the responsibility. You'll recall that the amendment bill, the National Land Transport Amendment Bill, was reversed, taken back to National Assembly by the President to say that you cannot do certain things. You cannot, reallocate certain functions to provinces. It will be unconstitutional. So municipalities have got their responsibility, a large responsibility, to make sure that the subsidy is implemented. They take large chunk, and the national sphere, provincial sphere are there to create an enabling environment, essentially for that to happen. The Constitution requires that should be the case. All right. And then, in conclusion, Rihanna, you can take this.
Okay, thanks, Mateta, for really taking us through. And there's already been a lot of conversation happening in the chat. But colleagues, I'm going to suggest, because we are human and not machines, we're now at 18 minutes past 10. Please take a comfort break. I know that there are many of you who have not connected in a long time. So you may actually, I saw Bongani Kupe enter the room at a point. Bongani, it's been forever. So, let's take the time maybe just to socially chat if we need to. We'll come back at 10:30, and then you've already posed some great questions to the team, and we really want to be in a conversation with you. So please take your tea or coffee break, your comfort break, a stretch break. I know that people kind of get stuck to chairs on Zoom meetings. Mateta's taking his coffee break seriously there, I could see it. And please also feel free to put on your camera if you just want to chat to others in the room, and we will resume at 10:30. So for those of you who've just joined the session, we're currently taking a little bit of a break. We've just had the presentation on the high-level overview of the draft policy. And when we come back from our coffee comfort break, we will be going into conversation. Harry, I wonder, is it like, if people are still there, is it possible that we just allow them to turn on their videos and kind of, this would be the time we'd be grabbing scones and like hugging people we haven't seen for a long time. So is it possible that we just allow people to turn on their cameras, that we just connect as the transport fraternity who have big challenges on our plates, respectively?
Surely we can, Rihanna.
So it would be nice to see those who are here. If you are able to put your camera on, please do. We've got 8 minutes of a comfort break left, but it would be nice just to meet as human beings before our titles and our roles. Davi, it's been a very long time. The last time I think I visited you in your very windy Cape Town house with Lisa Seftel. Nelisa, lovely to see you. Helena, lovely to see you, and enjoying the focus that you've raised in your questions on issues of gender. So we will get the team to respond to that. Lokendra from Nepal is much more excited to see the transport fraternity than we are to see each other.
So this is my first time. I'm very happy and this is very excited also. So thank you for this opportunity. So I'm very excited. So I love this topic also, right?
Thanks, Lokendra. And colleagues, really, this is a social conversation now. We're not having the transport conversation. So if you just want to, Darko, you can put your camera on. Chifiwa, it'll be lovely just to be in conversation. Winston, nice to see you there. Tell us, earlier people were telling us why they've joined the session, Winston. What's prompted you? And then Fura, you've just joined in as we went into break. So it'd be lovely to hear from you as well. Winston?
Thanks, Rihanna. Good morning, colleagues. Like Rihanna saying, within the transport fraternity. Yeah, I think the big question is from our side. As you know, the city of Cape Town and has undertaken.
No, Winston. No big questions. Okay. Now it's a social conversation. We'll have the big questions at 10:30 when people have had a chance to kind of digest all of this. So now it's a social conversation.
Okay. I don't know if
maybe he might be comfortable talking about Liverpool having dropped out of the FA Cup.
Mateta, now you're really adamant that you want to create divisions, right? Winston, you want to take Mateta on that one?
Mateta, actually, that is very sensitive, Mateta.
For Liverpool fans, yeah. Actually, not as a supporter and a fan of the other side of the Mercy, Everton. I'm quite happy and quite chuffed that.
You see, Elena, if you give them half a chance, they're going to have a conversation about football. So please feel free to bring in what you want to bring into a social conversation. I am noting all of the questions in the chat, and we will at 10:30. Fura, you had joined just before we went to break. So tell us what brings you into this session today and introduce yourself to us. If I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Fura Simbeko. And Mr. Soko, DOT Eastern Cape. How are things in the Eastern Cape today? What is the weather like?
The weather is great. And I think we can talk about football since Barcelona, Man United, AC Milan all won.
Me football illiterate. I'm not joining this conversation. I will leave it to colleagues who clearly are more excited about this thing called football. The only time I was excited about football was in 2010 when we could do something with transport and football. Then it was exciting. Bongani, are you still here? I'm going to look for you in the chat because I have literally not seen you in absolute ages. Bongani Kupe. I see you on the participant list. Do you know the problem with virtual meetings? You can be there and not be there. No? I know that happens a lot. Fura, welcome. Tell us about you. What makes you join this session today?
Okay, like Mr. Sogo, I'm also from the Eastern Cape, the Alpha and Joe region. So I joined as Eastern Cape Department of Transport.
Wonderful. And you have views on the strong football views that other people are sharing?
I wouldn't want to be drawn into that as well.
We have enough battles on our hands without the battle of football, hey? So colleagues, we have 5 more minutes of a body break, and Bongani Kope, if you're actually there, it'll be really nice to see you. It's been forever. Please turn your camera on. We'd love to see you. And Neil is just joining us. Welcome, Neil. We are in a 5-minute comfort and body break, but we're just having a social conversation, Neil. So feel free to join in. Nelisa and Helene, I'm going to invite you in because otherwise we will run the risk of having a very male-dominated conversation. Nelisa, please unmute.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Hi.
I was about to say that how about we bring in issues that affect women, seeing that all the men in the meeting are talking about football, and we have nothing to say about football. I know that for a fact.
Okay, Nelisa, thank you. Lokendra, you're telling us that you still use mules for transportation in some parts of Nepal. I'm sure our colleagues from some of the provinces in South Africa can tell you that that's still the case in some rural provinces as well. Colleagues from Eastern Cape or anyone else wants to weigh in on the issue of mules as a transportation mode?
Maybe not mules, but in the Northern Cape, in the Eastern Cape, and in some parts of Mpumalanga and KZN, I'm sure you'll find donkeys as still parts of our transportation system.
Yeah, Madeline, you've just indicated the donkey carts, right? Madeline, let's bring a... And it's interesting because we're getting back into the transport conversation. As much as I said this is a social conversation.
We can't avoid it.
Can't avoid it, right? At least you have your coffee cup in the corner there, Madeline.
Yes, I know. I was trying to multitask, but it was hard. It was such an interesting conversation. I was curious about the word mules because I always thought the definition of mule is very specific, and it's mostly they're donkeys, and a mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. Is that... And they don't replicate. Is that true?
Lokendra, you used the term mule, and then our South African equivalent, we came in with donkey. Lokendra, you want to educate us on this as to how it works in Nepal in terms of the naming of animals? Noting that for Lokendra, it's now almost, I think, 2:30 in the afternoon. Maybe Lokendra's gone to get his lunch whilst the rest of us are having coffee. Okay, with kind of just 1 minute to go, and then we're going to kick off. Okay, Madeline is giving us a very Oxford definition here. The mule is a domestic equine hybrid between a donkey and a horse. It is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. Okay, talking about balancing the masculine and the feminine. Wikipedia. Okay, got it. Okay, colleagues, we will be kicking off in the next minute. So if you were grabbing that cup of coffee or a scone or something that you were doing. So with me here, I also have next to me, and I didn't introduce him because it's just me in the Zoom space, is Paseka. Paseka is originally from the Northwest province, but he lives in an informal settlement up the road from where our home office is at the Barefoot Facilitator. And he's keenly listening in he's been hearing a lot about the subsidy policy and how long it's been in the making. the draft subsidy policy. And at some point, I will invite you into the conversation as well if you want. Okay, it's just about to go 10:30, and thank you very much for all of your engagement, both on the YouTube channel as well as in the chat box. And I think I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to begin to answer these questions, but there are a number of categories of questions that I've been able to pick up. And anyone who's put a question in the chat, if you kind of want to come in with your voice just to amplify what it is you said, I think we really want to have this session as a discussion rather than just questions and then the drafting team answers. But Lizelle raised a question quite early on in the presentation, Mateta, around what are the plans that are in place to address the lack of spatial development in rural and informal areas, which compounds the complexity. Now, of course, I mean, I know that we're dealing with a subsidy policy, but it's interesting how many of the questions are really about people's kind of areas of passion, which might be built environment, which might be gender, which might be governance and administration. And I'm going to invite kind of all of that into the space. So maybe let's kick off with Lizelle's question first, and then we'll move over to Alvin's question, which was on capital and operational issues around the budget. Mateta, Darko, Zain, over to you guys.
Yeah, I mean,
Mateta, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, if I could come in quickly. If you look at some of the maybe two points or 3 points. One is if you look at a lot of the municipal transport plans, one of the things that are grossly lacking often is targets to say this is where we are going. They often say this is where we are, and this is what we want to do, and this is the budget essentially that we want to allocate and so forth. But very, very rarely you'll find, clear targets, policy targets that they want to get to. And one of those policy targets would be about how you want to transform spaces. So the policy begins to indicate where municipalities should be doing that in terms of those targets. For example, I've seen one of the plans in one of the municipalities in the Free State, where they still forecast that in 30 to 40 years from now, average distance for some areas will be still as high as 70 to 80 kilometers for commuting purposes. Now, if you are still planning and forecasting 30, 40 years from now to still achieve that, then you are planning to fail, the people. So the policy says, let's make sure that we embed these policy targets as part of planning to conscientize planners that it's not just about just recreating, it's really about transforming spaces. Yeah, so then there are incentives also to doing that, going forward. Yes.
Lizelle, as the person who posed that question, do you want to come back? Because I know often when we're kind of drafting a question, some of the nuance gets lost that we might have intended. Do you want to come back at all? Or are you satisfied?
Good day, Rihanna. Thank you for that. I think for me, I don't see the conversation happening at between departments. And that's sort of where the question originates from, is that we're drafting a policy to provide subsidy to individuals, but yet we are not empowering these individuals in the area they are, and providing economic growth within that area, thereby reducing the need for the transport, because as Patco, we still ferry a lot of people from the furthest points in Mpumalanga all the way through to Midrand and Joburg on a daily basis. And I mean, that's going across multiple districts, multiple provinces, and it's not sustainable in terms of subsidizing. And for a private company to operate, it's expensive. So I'm not seeing that conversation happening. How are we addressing that?
Okay, I think let's keep that one there, Lizelle, and I agree with you. I mean, the interdepartmental, the intergovernmental. Zain, did you want to come in? Or Darko?
Maybe just to, I saw a couple of comments and comments. They're quite.
Darko, you might want to turn your video. You might
How
want to turn
do we
your video
achieve
off.
what we are proposing? Okay.
No, Darko, you might want to turn your video off because your sound quality is bad. I'm coming to those questions. So I'm running through the questions as they were raised. Okay. So I think Lizelle has kind of amplified the question that she raised. I want to move now to Alvin's question, which is the long-term planning in relation to this policy. How does it enable the country to substantively deal with our significant backlogs in capital expenditure in the system? So colleagues can read the detail of Alvin's question in the chat, and then Darko, we will come to there's a range of questions around the how of it, and we will get into that conversation as well. But let's deal with Alvin's question around the backlog, capital and operational issues. Mateta, you want to kick off there?
Yes, that is one of the reasons why the policy indicates that you need to subsidize to the tune of equivalent of 5% of GDP. What is happening at the moment, society is, given the backlogs that are there historically, society is paying about 12% of so transport costs equivalent of 12% of GDP to society. And if you look at similar places elsewhere, and these charts are there in the documents, it shows that this is actually about 5% more than it should be for South Africa to be competitive. So the society is paying 5% more towards creating a kilometer, person kilometers more, and that's because we rely a lot on low capacity modes. The network is underdeveloped, well developed. There are issues of efficiencies and so forth. So the cost to society is massive. So the 5%, that 5%, is seen as a way in which government can start creating efficiencies through partly through capital investment. At the moment, the split capital operations, well, historically is about 50, 52, 48, thereabout, but it's mainly in rail. A lot of that is in rail. And that which is being allocated is actually underspent. If you look at, the likes of PRASA, a lot of the allocation has been underspent to the extent that PRASA then accumulates all these and is publicly stated all of this investment, earning interest, essentially. So the whole point of investment is not for an entity to earn interest, it's to really create network efficiencies. So part of creating those accountabilities, you have a contractor, and then you've got a contracting authority, is to make sure that you create those accountabilities, going forward. They are there in policy, even the white paper. Now they are being elevated even more to say, let's create those efficiencies through accountability. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mateta. Alvin, do you want to come back on that issue at all? Alvin Harris, would you like to come back at all? Okay, I'm going to keep it moving. So now, Darko, we're going to deal with, so Helena, I have not discounted your question. It's an issue on gender that you've raised, and we will come back there. But I want to specifically raise, and Darko, I think it was the issue that you were starting to raise. So a number of people, Philip, Nelisa, Yolande, have raised questions on either the issue around municipalities, their capability, whether we should just leverage the capacity that is already at provincial level. So there've been a pool of questions around that. And then there's also been this issue around how will state-owned infrastructure, how will the state-owned infrastructure that is already owned and operated by private companies? So that was echoed by a few people. So it would be interesting now from the team's perspective to get responses to that. And I mean, I'm also hearing a conversation. So colleagues, I'm going to suggest, can we pause using the chat box for now? And can we bring our voices into the room just so that we are actually in conversation with each other? Otherwise, we're having one conversation through the chat and another conversation on the Zoom platform. So let's try to have the conversation on the Zoom platform. But over to the team in relation to the issues around capacity, which is there's been another one, I think, that has been raised in the chat just as we were in the conversation. So over to you. Darko, do you want to try?
Can I?
Zain? Yeah, please go ahead, Zain.
So thank you, Rihanna. I'm going to keep my camera off so I don't have issues. Rihanna, the point that has come across from Mateta and Darko is the imperative that we follow in the preparation of this policy stems ultimately from the Constitution, then follows through into the National Land Transport Act, and that's the basis upon which this subsidy policy emanates. Now, if you look at the Constitution, Chapter 4 and 5 of the Constitution sets out the responsibilities of the spheres of government. And that then follows in through the National Land Transport Act. And Section 11 makes it clear that for the provincial sphere of government, that where municipalities lack capacity and resources, that those municipalities are capacitated to perform their land transport functions. So the province has a responsibility to assist municipalities to deal with this. And it follows further that when the national minister publishes a national land transport policy, the provincial MEC has to follow through with this and deal with the municipalities within that MEC's area and consult with them to prepare a provincial land transport policy. Now this is not something that we've put together for the first time out of the in the preparation of the policy. It emanates from the National Land Transport Act. Then the question on the municipalities that lack capacity and the question of spatial development. The Act provides that municipalities must develop land transport policy and strategy within its areas, and this must include and must incorporate spatial development policies. And the Act also provides for integrated development plans. So an integrated transport plan is not something that can remain within the municipality in a vacuum. It has to be attached to something. So the broader discussion within the municipality is its IDP, which will incorporate the integrated transport plan on the municipality side. And then on the issue of financial planning, where municipalities really don't have these capacities, you know, the concept of the integrated transport plan is to give some structure to the issue of funding. Now, why do I say that? Because an ITP will then identify the requirements within the area. It's attached to an integrated development plan. And when financial planning with regard to land transport within or affecting its area, and with particular reference to transport planning, infrastructure, operations, services, maintenance, monitoring, administration, with due focus on rehab and maintenance of infrastructure. Now, this is not me making a statement. This falls under Section 11C 5 of the National Land Transport Act. And so you cannot deal with things in isolation of each other. So the integrated transport plan is a concept of planning within the municipal sphere. If it cannot deal with it, the province has to assist. The national minister merely puts together these guidelines and can publish regulations that deal with this.
Thanks, Zane. Darko, do you want to come in at all? But I want to avoid this to be just a conversation amongst the drafting team. So colleagues who are attendees in the session, I'm really going to ask you, please don't post your questions in the chat at this stage. Please raise your virtual hand or just note in the chat that you want to speak. And I really want us to be in conversation with each other. So Zain has kind of given the legal perspective and this idea, I think that Lizelle has also raised about the lack of interdepartmental planning at municipality level, the lack of intergovernmental coordination, and that everyone, I mean, I think a colleague from the Eastern Cape just put in about issues of provinces are also struggling with capacity. So the capacity issues are real. Darko, do you want to come in at all on, and Mateta, I think I want specifically for the team to answer the question that Yolandi raised about how will the state own infrastructure that is already owned and operated by private companies? Because that, I mean, I think someone in one of the municipalities or provinces said, well, this is just nationalization of transport. That's what it is. So can we really deal with that issue? But Darko, do you want to come in now?
Maybe just to emphasize, not specifically, that there are a couple of these how questions, okay? Whether it's how do we get to the capital, subsidy, implementation capacities, and so on and so on. I think part of our scope, once the policies are approved, finally, that to prepare the implementation strategy as well, to answer some of these questions, so to give the guidance how to do it. We do admit that it's not necessarily easy and quick process. It will take certain period of time, but there are some specific thoughts that we have how to propose going forward, okay? Maybe Mateta can address some specific ones.
And then also a range of questions on PTOC, PTNG. I guess they're all kind of part of that pool of how. But Mateta, why don't you come in? And then colleagues, I really want the rest of you to begin to weigh in on the discussion as well. Mateta?
Yes, thanks, Rana. I think part of the before I get into detail, part of the response is look at the alternative. What is the alternative? You have massive backlogs. You have a large chunk, as indicated in the stats, chunk of the population that essentially is struggling. They are actually the economy is being held back partly because society is inefficiently funding a passenger kilometer. So what is the alternative? You can maintain the status quo and continue just inflating the numbers, or you can say that let's implement what we said we would do to start with. The constitution, constitutional imperative, let's deliberately do so. The legal framework that you've created, you want to implement, create mechanisms to implement those things. The alternative is not very appealing. The alternative is just entrenching society into deeper poverty to a large extent. So part of this is to say, how can we create more leverage on the resources that are there? So on the state-owned, how is the state going to own infrastructure that is already owned by private sector? Now, we want to take us, let's go a step back to the concept of contracting. To be able to control quality of service, government needs to contract. So services need to be implemented through contracts. So part of controlling the quality, making sure that there are outcomes, predictable outcomes and so forth, is to make sure that that is specified. Now, the policy specifically talks about capital subsidy investment for contracted networks. So if you're going to contract for strategic purposes in your area, then you ensure that there is infrastructure, for that, and then you get, operations to operate that which is contracted. It is not about taking over everything. It's about saying strategically what needs to be, what needs to be serviced. And then you make sure that you resource those things. Now, you don't want to, as a policy principle, leave that to market forces. You want to make sure that as public transport is the responsibility of government. It's public transport. It's not private transport. You contract, of course, could be private actors, but they are operating under a contracted regime. And then this issue of nationalization, I think we touched on it as part of that response, to say that it's about making sure that you manage the quality outcomes, quality of service, just like you do in healthcare, just like you do in other services, just like you do in the legislative arm of government. Look at the prosecutorial arm, look at the judiciary. A lot of that is state-owned. The quality is controlled by the state, but maybe not to drift into that. But the point is that you need to take extra measures as government to make sure that there is quality control on what is being delivered. And this is one way, one really fundamental way of doing so. And then lastly, also to say that this is, of course, you can look at this policy in isolation, but it only works where you have policy coherence. For example, you want to make sure that as far as possible, you finance this from budget surpluses. You don't want to dip into the resources that are there. You want to say, where there's a surplus, you want to then allocate it for investment purposes as much as is possible. So the point I'm making is that this is one of the multiple policies that need to talk to each other. And it's really it is the role of cabinet to make sure that there is that policy coherence going forward.
Thanks, Mateta. Rian and Rieta Claassen, I mean, Prof. Walters, I've noted your hand. I'll take you in a minute. But Rian and Rieta have asked similar questions in relation to what is the impact of the policy on the fiscus. So I'm going to ask the team to ready themselves to answer that, particularly because we all know how constrained the fiscus currently is. So we're going to take Prof. Walters and then Chris in that order, and then allow the team to respond to that set. Prof. Walters?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I mean, just to what Mateta has now said, where he equals state ownership to quality. I cannot, for my best in my life, agree with that statement. I mean, we have very practical examples around us, like SAA, where the government owns SAA, and you have pathetic service, and the thing that's cost us 50 billion over the last number of years. You have PRASA state-owned, and look at the result. You have Transit Freight Rail, state-owned, look at the ports. I mean, there's no argument, from my view, to make that state-owned equals quality. Quality can be enforced through contracting regime, and you have contracting your proposed policy, but only for the operational side, because the state will own the assets and the rolling stock and the infrastructure and so on, which I cannot agree with, because it's contrary to what's happening anywhere in the world. That this is a form of nationalization. So the argument doesn't go up for me in that the state ownership equals quality. You can enforce quality through the contracting system, which has been done, maybe not effectively or effectively enough, but it has been done in the past. I think this debate around local authorities taking responsibility, one cannot hide behind the fact that it's not, because it's not happening, you can't put it into a policy or can't develop a policy because local authorities cannot do the work. We've had this since 1996, the previous white paper, and the previous white paper also made provision and subsequent legislation for the development of transportation plans and so on, and development plans by local authorities. It's not happened since 1996. What will change this? I mean, and to approve a policy, as intimated, let's approve the policy, then work on the detail. It's not going to work because we've had the same situation with the previous policy of contract. Even the previous governments in 1986 approved contracting for public transport, and they stopped the contracting regime in 1992 because of affordability. The new government in 1996 white paper kept the contracting, and now we don't have contracting at the moment because of the lack of funding. So to accept the policy without really addressing the fundamental issues that hinders implementation of policy, we're busy with the paper exercise. 20 years from now, we'll sit in exactly the same situation that we have at this point in time. And as I say, local authorities, it's a big problem. It's really a big problem. Even many provinces are really problematic as well at this point in time. So the building blocks, I'm afraid, of a lot of work that's been done will result in this policy not being implemented. And the third one, I just want to comment on, the 5% of GDP. South Africa's GDP is about 65 trillion. That means you're looking for 230 billion to fund this. And really, I don't think it's going to work, not in the country today with financial constraints that we have. And to approve a policy that's going to be dependent on 230 billion for implementation, no matter how long it takes, that figure will escalate, obviously. I think it's unrealistic. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Walters. Chris.
Great, thanks, Rahana, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here at this session. So my name is Chris Cost. I'm with the Institute for Transportation Development Policy, ITDP. So we just had one suggestion on the indicators that are used to measure the success of the policy. It's in, there was the table in the draft policy, table 8.1. And we thought that one element that's not quite captured in the existing indicators is the frequent public transport. So we wanted to recommend adding another indicator for persons near transit, or usually refer to it as PNT, where it would basically measure the number of people who are within a 500-meter walking distance of public transport that operates at least once every 10 minutes. And it's a really critical indicator because, you know, as the transit planner Jarrett Walker always says, frequency is freedom. And for people to really be able to access their city, get to jobs and other opportunities easily, it's important to be able to go out there and get transit without having to use a schedule and think about when you're going to get the bus. So we thought that could be added, and we could also have a sub-indicator of low-income people near frequent public transport. And these would help us, you know, tackle both the question of public transport supply, and are we investing in the modes that give access to transit to the most people at the lowest price. But it would also help point to the land use issues that need to be solved in South African cities, of making sure that we're planning denser development so that more people can live near the existing frequent transit routes. So that was our suggestion, and we wanted to thank you for the consideration.
Thanks, Chris. I'm noting Rita's hand. Rita, let's take you. You had also posted in the chat. So let's take you, and then we'll allow for the team to respond to this round, and then we'll open another round. Rita?
Thank you, Rihanna, and good morning to everybody. I just wanted to make a comment also regarding the ownership of infrastructure by government. For me, it's nothing new. It's a principle actually that was already specified in the 2013 gazetted model contract documents for the rollout of IPTN contracts. And I was at that stage part of the drafting team of that model document. And it took us about 4 years just to develop that document in consultation with Sabawa and Santaco. And the intention at that time was, especially looking at your IPTNs going forward, and at that stage even PTOG contracts, that government should not be paying for infrastructure each time that a contract goes out to tender. In other words, each time they get a new operator, as part of his contracting rates, fund new depots, but that infrastructure be owned by government, so that going forward there's always more money available for operations. So the statement in the draft policy document that where possible, government then should own the infrastructure, yes, I strongly support that, because for me it supports the gazetted model document of 2013. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Let's allow the team to respond, and then also going to suggest that if people are vehemently opposed to what's in the current draft of the policy, that you possibly also provide alternatives and suggestions, because of course this policy comes 30 years into a democratic dispensation. In many ways, poverty and inequality, in fact, have worsened in this time. Spatial planning and the lack of coordination. So in fact, what apartheid kind of dreamt of, we further consolidated into a democratic dispensation. And I think the challenges of fiscus and transformation, there are many things that we're trying to actually address here. So colleagues, if you're saying this is an absolute can't do, Prof. Walters, as you've indicated, given kind of how we've seen other parts of public services unfold, then it'll be useful to also propose to us what should be, because I think we all know that at the moment we are paying subsidy, and are the users getting value for money? Is society getting value for money from the current subsidy that we are paying? But let me allow the team then to respond. Darko, Mateta, Zain.
Okay, maybe let me start and others will come in. I think well, one of the aspects which Prof. Walters have alluded to and Reta then commented, I think Mateta has also indicated in his presentation that, okay, what do we have as the infrastructure? Basically, we have depots, we have rolling stock, we have some automatic fare collection systems in place or equipment. So in essence, government is already paying for all of that through the contracts. So all these fee per kilometers, whether it's a current PTOG or PTNG contracts, they already include cost of capital in the fee per kilometer. Okay, so rolling stock is probably easier one because it has its lifetime, and after its lifetime, it basically can be replaced. So besides just the possible benefit of economies of scales by procuring a finance cost, by procuring through the government, we also have the risk of lack of proper operations management. I think we have some cases, especially in IPTN recently in Ria Vaya, where the operator is not capable of doing proper operations, but they own the fleet. So it's not easy basically to bring another operator just to replace the non-performing operator. So we have different cases. There is no perfect solution. There's a pros and cons of almost basically different proposals, but we believe that in a next cycle of planning cycle of maybe 2 to 3 decades, that this model that is being proposed would be more effective for the sustainable development of the public transport. Okay, maybe let me pause, and if Mateta would like.
Yes, I think quickly responding to some of the points made. To Professor Walters, look, it's a position that I suppose one can take that where the state or government has not performed, we can decide to say, okay, we lose trust in government and we are going to allow private sector to take over. It's a position that you can take. But that is not what the policy is saying. It's saying that the constitution requires that we take responsibility. Now, there are examples where things have not worked, and there are specific reasons why they have not worked. We need to address those problems. We need to address those problems. The symptoms of them are what some of the examples that you gave. But the problems that are there, they really need to be addressed. Like any other country, if we don't own and solve our problems and we mask them, we create an alternative government, that is not sustainable at all. We need to make sure that government works as it should. And it is the society that needs to take responsibility. Society needs to own the policy, needs to own for example, this policy and say, we want this to work. We want accountability. Ultimately, it is societies that will create accountability. Yeah, so it's really a position, but we cannot, in a constitutional framework, say that something has not worked, therefore we create an alternative to what the constitution says. We need to fix that problem. I mean, there are examples of things that have worked. You've given examples of things that have not worked, have failed in some cases, and they are being addressed, in different ways. There's the Gautrain, which is really state-owned. It's got its own, shortcomings, but it is working. Similarly, there are other public services that continue to work, and we need to learn from those and say, what is it that you're doing that we can translate into these other, services elsewhere? But we cannot allow government to fail. That will be irresponsible of the society to say, this entity has not worked, therefore let's can it. On the issue of ownership of infrastructure and so forth, perhaps that's part of the problem, that you have a PRASA that is doing everything on its own. It is designing its own network. It is accounting to itself, to its board. Is planning, is creating its own infrastructure, largely without much influence from the planning authorities, from local government. The accountability structures have not been implemented. So part of going forward is to say, let us embed accountability there. It has not been there. Let's make sure that we embed it in our framework. Now, society needs to, again, make sure that that happens. We cannot say that there's no accountability, therefore, let's leave it that way. Let's leave things as are. Let's create an alternative state. Again, that will be irresponsible of society to do so. That things have taken long. Yes, these are complex issues. We live in a very complex society. And we've done some work parallel to this on issues of turnaround, what it takes to turn around a ship like this. Now, turnaround is possible. There are certain things, levers that you need to pull to make sure that it happens. It's not impossible. Now, that's something that's taken long, just says that, things are not easy. It's not easy. We're dealing with a complex problem on its own, but also a complex society. And that means the skills that we bring into the fold, it cannot just be engineers who work alone. It cannot just be, the traditional town planners. It cannot just be, the economists and so forth. We need to blend to bring those skills. And it takes leadership. It will take leadership to bring us all together, to harmonize, to make sure that we move, together. It cannot be that we say that we haven't had that kind of leadership, therefore let's abandon. We can call for that kind of leadership to happen because it has been shown elsewhere in the world that turnaround is possible. We're not unique in that it's impossible to create turnaround in South Africa. We can, if we have the will, the political will, as society, to do so. And then the 5%, what is the alternative? 1%, that less than 1% that is there at the moment, that will just further entrench what we have. We can create efficiencies in what is there. Yes, we can create efficiencies, but it doesn't address the backlogs that we have at the moment. So we show where that 5% comes from. It says that the society is paying equivalent of about 5% more on transport than it should relative to other societies with similar mobility patterns elsewhere in the world. So from a policy perspective, you want to guide where that comes from. At the moment, you're spending as a country 3.4% of GDP on road crashes. And we are saying we cannot afford a country that spends 3.4% of GDP equivalent on crashes, addressing crashes. The deficit for road accident fund projected to something like 500 billion. And we say we cannot afford to direct investment to making sure that we arrest the decline. It cannot be that we say that we have a responsible government where we allow such trends to be the norm. We need to reverse those things. Again, it takes leadership. It will take leadership that I believe we have. I believe South Africa has got leaders. We just need to bring them on board to make sure that we create those turnaround. And we're not even saying that it's an instant thing. It's not a big bang, do it. we're saying let's move towards. Okay, you start somewhere, but move towards doing that for you to be able to address those backlogs. And then I think on the other point mentioned earlier, the indicators, I think it's something to look at. Issues of access is something that is close to issues of sustainability, and it's in the one of the ISO documents. I think ISO 37 something. It is recommended as one of the indicators as part of sustainable transport, but it applies more to urban areas. But it's something that I think we can look at. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mateta. Johan, I'm noting your hand. Please go ahead.
From the consulting the transportation industry. I've posted my question also in the chat, and it's more related to the practicality. And I know there's a lot of hows that we need to address. Maybe before I get there, let me just step back. I think there's no illusion that we know, and all of us around this table know, that this is extremely difficult thing that we're dealing with. There's no easy answer. If there was an easy answer, there was something already on the ground. So we will have to develop this through debate, and we need to go in the right direction when we start off. Right. So my question was more related to the practical things. Now, I've heard in terms of the municipalities that was raised, that is a practical thing. I don't want to go into that bandwagon that has been discussed. For me, it is the practical thing is, I understand that this will be a directly user subsidized model. So in other words, it's actually a form of a grant. So there was also mentioned that Gautrain was to some extent, successful. And I think part of the success of the Gautrain is because it's operator subsidized. So the user is indirectly subsidized. So that is the first thing that I really would like to understand. So this is a direct user subsidy, and therefore it is actually a type of a grant. Then when it gets practical, if you want to implement this, and it falls now with the municipalities, heavy burden on the municipalities. So how I then understand this, the municipalities will specify a service. Let's say on a route or whatever. I mean, it could be a bus, it could be bus and taxi, it could be rail, it could be whatever. So the municipality will specify the service. Because the municipality is going to contract someone. It was stated that it won't be left to the free market. So there will be a contracting entity, so the municipality will contract someone. So that the implication of that is already that the taxi industry must become a legal entity, or operators, or one operator or several of them together must become a legal entity, because you can't contract with a non-legal entity. So that is the first or another practical consideration. So then there's a service specification. So the municipality will then specify this service, and how I will understand this, it will go out on tender probably, and elect and award this to a operator who must operate. But the operator is dependent on feet, on passengers, and passengers that must be able to pay. So now the passenger will be paid through his grant or load some money on a ticket. That is how the operator will be compensated for its service that it's delivered directly from the user. Now, if one do it in this way, then there will be different levels of probably subsidy, and throughout, well, it will be a route-based type of subsidy which because there might be a low demand, and to run a certain service, that low demand, you need a certain subsidy on that specific route, or the people that must be paid for that subsidy. So somewhere there's a revenue risk and a specification of ridership. Where will that lie within this? I think I've got a few other things, but I've raised enough from my point. If we can maybe just think about these things. Thank you.
Okay, let's have the team respond, and then I want to deal with Helena's issue on gender. I know that the subsidy policy might not necessarily be covering that, but I want the team to kind of go into the concerns that Helena has raised. Okay, can we
let me
respond
start.
to Johan's?
Let me start, and then Madeta will come in. Johan raised a few things. One is his understanding is that it's a direct user-targeted subsidy proposed. Well, yes and no, Johan. It's proposed to have a capital and operational subsidy. So capital subsidy would be based on if it's done as policy proposes, the capital expenditure will be taken over by the government. Hence, the costing would be lowered from a user's perspective. And we believe that that subsidy would cover the users above the poverty line. Users that are below poverty line, we are proposing the direct user subsidy, and based on understanding of technology development, we believe that that's possible in the near future to basically fund, in essence, grant recipients at the moment, social grant recipients, to fund them directly through the social grant cards through the technology innovation. So that's how we believe the direct user targeted subsidy could be distributed. The second part of your comment is, yes, I think to a fair degree you have covered that municipalities or planning authorities would design the services that will be required, and the combination of modes that would best fit the service that is required. It doesn't mean whether it's a taxi or bus or combination of different types of vehicle modes. We don't see taxi operators as taxi operators. We see them as a public transport operators. Likewise, the current bus companies. So they would have to adjust themselves and prepare themselves to go on a public tender to bid for the services that have been designed by the planning authorities. So that's how the integrated transport plan, in essence, should be prepared. Some initial ideas or some initial examples are the IPTN projects throughout the country, which basically have been designed on the basis of integrated public transport networks. Yes, so far we have tried to assist the taxi industry to corporatize themselves in various cities, but in essence, the direct subsidy cannot be administered through individual operators as they have been operating at this point in time, or for the last couple of decades. So there is some kind of some fundamental changes that have been proposed in a policy, and yes, your thinking to a fair degree has been in the right direction from that perspective. Yeah. Mateta maybe can add.
Thanks, Darko. Mateta, do you want to come in and add it all?
Yeah, quickly, just to say that I hear Johan. Remember, this is outcomes-based. This whole concept of performance-based standards is very, very important. You don't want to be prescriptive to a planning contracting authority on how they want to implement. You're interested in the outcomes. You're saying, give me a design that will create those outcomes. Now, it is up to them to then innovate and make sure that outcome is achieved. Now, if you're going to be saying, this is how they are going to do it, to an extent that it affects the operations and so forth, then you are now interfering in the mandate of a planning authority and also a contracting authority to some extent. So there are certain things, of course, that you design in terms of the mechanisms, the policy mechanisms, the regulations, and so forth that need to be in place. Darko touched on it, but on the implementation side of things, perhaps piloting and showing in reality how this would work may be part of one of the steps going forward, to say that we're taking the province of whatever, Limpopo, for example, and we're going to show how this.
You had to choose your home province, Mateta.
It's an example. Yeah, so we could do that and see how it could work, and then we tweak it and therefore. But of course, sometimes pilots often become they are forever there. So you need to have a project management team that manages that, and we have the capacity in the country. We've got project managers in the country, we've got thinker capacity in the country to be able to do those things. South Africa is blessed with intellectual capital that we are underutilizing. We can do these things going forward. Thanks.
So I agree with you, Mateta, that we have the capability across the country. But one thing we haven't been able to really get moving substantially is women's safety, whether that's on public transport, whether that's in public space, whether that's in the private home. And Helena kind of quite early on in the conversation asked, does the policy protect women on public transport? Does separating women on public transport tackle the wider problems of sexual harassment and assault? Or does it merely move the problem around? And how can these issues be addressed? Employing more women into the public transport sector, is that an option? I was in Delhi last year, and they have introduced on their rail service separate coaches for women to deal specifically with this issue. So, I mean, we've been talking about, all of the issues that plague society and how mobility and transport is but a reflection of the broader societal issues. But does the subsidy policy get into this issue at all? Team?
I don't think current subsidy policy explicitly touches on specific gender-related matters. I think it's, again, would be a responsibility of the planning authorities how to come up with different mechanisms, how to prevent that, or how to minimize that, and how to deal with it. They're obviously much broader than the public transport only and mobility-related matters, the various gender-related discussions and issues and challenges, not only in South Africa, across the world, in my view. So I think we know that there are some attempts in other countries in the world how to come up with different mechanisms how to assist in specifically gender harassment matters. And as I indicated, in my view, that would be again innovation that comes from the planning authorities, how to address those.
Darwin. So Helena, I also will try to get Harry to share. I will send Harry the link to share a framework called She Rises, which has been developed by Safety Pin, and I think has some important considerations between built environment, mobility. And I'm wondering, Mateta and team, whether, as part of those indicators, whether as much as we've put in disability as an indicator, I know, Darko, that this is a global issue, but I think in South Africa, women feel particularly strongly. Women's voices are generally underrepresented in issues of mobility. And is there a way we could consider bringing that into the metrics that we do look at? But let's hold that thought, and let me invite Davi in at this point.
Hello, good morning.
Morning, Davi. We hear you clearly. Please go ahead.
Okay, in fact, this is Oscar. I'm together with Davi, but I just wanted to raise a question. I've heard here about the user-targeted subsidy, and if looking at this, it looks to me that this will be mostly on areas with low density, rural areas where you're going to have most of maybe the people with the low income. And I heard that it will be done through the same way they administer the social grant, for example. Then my question becomes, how do we ensure that that subsidy is used to the purpose it was meant to, if it is administered in that way? That's my question. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. I love Zoom. You can be Davi and you can become Oscar. The joy of meeting in the virtual world. Team, anybody want to respond there? Mateta?
Maybe let me do first. Mateta can also add. Davi, I'm not the expert in that level of technology, but through consultation with some of the authorities or experts in that field, these days we can use one card and kind of divide it into different wallets, I believe, as a smart cards. So one particular wallet on a social grant card could be dedicated to transport funding, and it could be rules and regulations how to use, and it can be also only used basically in the vehicles. It can be designed in that way, maybe just in a simplistically talking. That's how I understand it. Maybe Mateta can go a little bit more in detail.
No, I think you've addressed it, Darko. So it's a design issue. I mean, you cannot have a foolproof, design. Designs evolve because there's always a problem. There's always so it's really a design issue, like any other thing. I mean, I don't know how many versions of Microsoft Windows you've loaded, just this year, alone, just to address the issues of, design flaws. So designs evolve, but the objective is that you want to make sure that you target, and I think we've got mature technology to be able to at least get us there. Most of the time. Yeah, so but it's really a design issue.
Okay, thanks, Oscar. So colleagues, we have a few more minutes for questions. I'm seeing Vusi Ntombela. Please come in, Vusi. We'll run the question and conversation session up until 11:45. Vusi, over to you.
Good morning, team.
Morning.
I'm audible.
Yeah, we hear you. We hear you, Vusi. If you can come a little bit closer, but we do hear you.
Thank you. I'm Vusi Ntombela from JR Chwewu Express. I think this question has been asked before by someone on the chat. I just need to understand from the doctor that in terms of the draft public transport, what criteria will be used to subsidize the bus companies, especially the MEE bus companies that are currently operating and expanding their operation to other areas, which will be the new extended contract to expand on other areas. I'll give an example that there's a contract that is running in Tembisa, and now it's expanded to the whole of Uguruleni, to Brakpan, Tsakane, and Katoras. So I just need to understand the criteria in terms of the new draft. That what will be the criteria that will be used? Thank you.
So, colleagues, I'm going to allow the team to respond, but I want to say that obviously we have had the benefit of grappling with these issues, as we've indicated, since 2019. And, you know, we can't in a 3-hour session kind of get everyone up to speed, but it does feel, Mateta, that we just need to, can we reiterate some of the principles, one of which being is no longer mode specific. That we are proposing, Vusi, that we move away from mode specific. But I'll allow the team to respond. And then I see Claire has put in a question into the chat. Okay, it's exactly my question, right? Claire's saying her understanding is that we're moving away from a mode specific method. Can you clarify this? Thanks, Claire, for that clarification, but let me allow the team. Mateta, why don't you take this one?
Yes. Yeah. So the question from JR Cho. So it's a practical issue that I suppose they are facing in the municipality Ekurhuleni. But maybe two or three things. There's procurement policy that a contracting authority needs to use to, contract. So there's a whole new public procurement bill that is doing the rounds, just to, suppose consolidate how public sector procures. So I would think that a contracting authority would then be guided by that, procurement, firstly regulations, the law, but also a policy, and then the Department of Transport, in terms of this policy, they are doing their work. They are saying we're creating a policy environment, and we want you as a planning authority and also a contracting authority subsequently to make sure that you achieve specific outcomes. How that will affect the operators who are there, already, is going to be subjected to. It's actually a function of what the planning and contracting authorities actually do. So the more and more municipalities get involved in this, the better. I think what we have so far is just a historical pattern of the movements and so forth. There's a lot of gaps that are there that we haven't been addressing because, again, the local government hasn't really been playing a big role, in terms of addressing those gaps going forward. So the policy says local government needs to do that. How it affects the operator, the current operators directly, is that we're implemented, where local authorities implement the policies, then you'll start seeing the procurement policy coming in to say this is the supposed criteria that they will apply for contracting purposes. Based on their plans. Yeah.
Mateta,
yeah, like Rihanna said. Yep.
I'm cognizant of the time, and we've got 2 more hands up, and Paseka next to me wants to say something. So can I allow that round, and then we're going to have to pull the discussion to closure. But clearly, like Aman's hand is also gone up. Okay, so we've got 4. Let's take Dale, Johan, Aman, Paseka in that order, and then we'll allow the team to respond. Dale?
Thank you, Rihanna. Also, thank you for the opportunity for me being able to be part of the transport industry. I'm fairly new to understanding how the transport industry actually works. But I think while I understand the purpose of the draft of the policy, it's clear to me from a high level perspective. And if I look at it from a high level perspective, there could possibly be a few gaps that can be filled. For example, we hear a lot about and we read a lot about innovation and efficiencies, but nowhere do we see how this is being managed or tracked, or where is this being recorded for transparency for the stakeholders in the transport industry, just to be aware of what is going on, what's being done, how the funds are being we know how the funds are being allocated, but how are people being held accountable for using those funds? And I think that's actually the biggest elephant in the room here, because we don't know how people are being held accountable for the funds that they are getting. And like, I think it was Oscar who we had a bit of a name issue there, but he touched on it actually. People need to be held accountable, because we also know that government money is being misused, but that's besides the fact. We need to understand from a transparency perspective that we are doing the right thing with the funds being allocated, and it needs to be transparent, because we are constantly going to go into this rigmarole of reiterating all these things year after year, day in, day out. But we need to understand this going forward.
Thanks, Dale. Point made. I'm going to move it along. Johan, please go ahead, and then Aman.
Thank you, Rihanna. I will rephrase my question into just a comment because we've got limited time. The issue that I just want to bring to the fore again is that we have for a system to work well and effective, we want to have more people on a service. So therefore, we will have to densify and infill. When we talk about urban form, promote densification and infill. And all the municipalities has the same drive to do that. I think that is a common purpose, common goal. What we've seen, the stumbling block here is actually bulk services. So provision of bulk so that infill and densification can take place, on which the transport service then can thrive if this happens. So in developing the subsidy, just consider if there would be a window for maybe such a joint application for funding to provide some other services or fund other services as well. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Johan. Aman?
Yeah, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I think thanks for the conversation here this morning. I think mine was, I don't know if perhaps I might have missed it, was around, I think, the draft policy, I think being able to take, I know that was mentioned up front, just in terms of, I think, the subsidy disparities, in a way it was stated that MPT receives less than 1%, I think, of all funding. And obviously with these new proposals that the subsidy policy wants to introduce, I think the question that I have, that would it not then have the unintended consequence of maintaining the status quo, particularly around, I think, leaving the minibus taxi industry, where potentially I think the policy could benefit, I think, the players that have already been receiving, I think, for the sort of funding or subsidies, I think, from government from that particular perspective, or is there something that will be left up to municipalities, I think, to have to bring the minibus taxi industry, I think, into the fold? Thanks.
Thanks, Aman. And Paseka sitting here next to me wanted to whisper his question into my ear before he asked it. And I said to him, there are no stupid questions, so he should go ahead and ask. So I have no idea what he's going to ask, but as a user, I guess, Paseka, over to you.
I don't think I was taking it as a user, but
okay, go ahead.
Mr. Dali, I think he has already touched whatever I wanted to say, because what he said about transparency and accountability, that was what was on my mind of all the subsidies which have been given to people, but who are getting them accountable of how the funds have been run and everything, because over and over above, we hear on TVs and radio stations that people are getting subsidized. But does that subsidy get used in a proper way, or is just subsidy to help those who are is it a subsidy for friendship, or is it a subsidy for a public use? That was my question.
Okay, thanks, Paseka, and thank you for sitting through a fairly technical discussion and kind of listening in. And then there is a question from Tood Lamini. How does the policy align to the national rail policy in relation to the infrastructure manager and operator? Okay, so team, if you can pull it together in 5 minutes in responding to all of this, so that we can leave the last 10 minutes just to take people through where submissions can be made and how to further engage. Darko, and then Mateta, Zain.
Okay, maybe from my perspective, okay, there are a couple of things. I think one thing that comes through the comments, even in the chat box, is repeatedly about the more specific planning and more specific objectives. As we mentioned already a couple of times, what is being proposed is that we de-link the subsidy from the mode. It's a planning authority who will have to make ITPs differently. They will have to state what is the status quo, but to actually create the plans to go away from specific modes. Maybe just in a policy document, and more specifically in a technical document, there is a section that deals with the viability of different vehicle modes. And maybe just to give you an idea, in most of the dense corridors or routes in urban areas, minibus taxi is not a viable mode if it is to be subsidized. So even now in Rustenburg, we are running the so-called mixed mode operations as part of the IPTM project. Just a labor component, instead of having one bus, if you want to have 5-6 taxis, just if you want to be compliant with the labor laws, just the labor cost of running a low capacity mode is bringing the cost of the service much higher. I don't want to go into a further depth of it, okay? So this model thing is, I think it's maybe a little bit difficult to understand or how it has been proposed in the policy, okay? Also to Johan, I think what we also been stressing is that this bunch of criteria or benchmarks that have been included in a policy document, it's something to plan for. We know that it cannot be achieved over the time. We know that transportation planning is not done in isolation from spatial planning, from the economic planning. So everything has to be coming and to be basically synchronized in the transportation plans in order to demonstrate the advancements in terms of the mobility through these benchmarks. Okay, let me pause there. Let Mateta maybe.
Okay, as I hand over to Mateta and Elisa, I just want to say, colleagues, and there are some colleagues from municipalities here. I'm seeing Neil and a number of colleagues from City of Cape Town. There is a dedicated session, and Elisa, with municipalities, which will be co-hosted by South African Cities Network, City Support Program, and SALGA this coming Wednesday afternoon, which will really be an opportunity for the municipalities themselves to weigh in on the draft subsidy policy. Mateta, over to you.
Yeah, I'll touch on just on the issue of the national rail policy and I suppose the bill. So the proposal on having an infrastructure manager aligns to what is being proposed, that the infrastructure essentially is owned and access is provided. Where the difference is that the policy says that bring your own rolling stock, and here we're saying that that should be the responsibility, of government. So I suppose it's one thing that probably needs to be synchronized. It could be just a wording that makes sure that there's harmony or conditions applied to those things. But then to also point that the proposals on the infrastructure manager, those are still proposals in the bill. There needs to be issues of efficiency, that need to be considered. Are you going to have, so many, of the infrastructure managers all over the place when we can consolidate? Remember, the country South Africa has got a roads agency. We said let's have a roads agency. Why do we need to have so many, infrastructure managers when we can have, unite mobility, the mobility agency, going forward, which serves the interest efficiently. Yes.
Thanks, Mateta. So colleagues, I know that we could still be in discussion for another 3 hours, given the complexity of the issues we're talking about, but we are fast running out of time. So Harry, if you could just bring up the final slide, if that's possible, from the presentation, because right now we're seeing the program. So colleagues, I know that right at the beginning, Chifiwa from the Department of Transport have given you an indication of how and where you can submit by email subsidypolicy@dot.gov.za, and you can also point your camera to the QR code in the presentation. It will take you directly to that email address, or hand deliver to 159 Struben Street. And of course, there is a postal option, but as per some of the services that are not working, not sure that if you post it, it's going to reach on time. So I'm going to hand back to Harry and Chifiwa, maybe Chifiwa first, and then Harry as our host to close off the session. But from my side and the drafting team, really to thank you for your considered inputs. Yeah, so Hanifa, there's the request from Nelissa that she will distribute to the districts in the province there. Thank you for that offer. We really, really do appreciate your time, the energy you've given to the session. There will obviously be the dedicated session with the municipalities, and we will keep you informed through the Transport Forum, Harry, if you're open to that, as work progresses in relation to the subsidy policy. Chifiwa, let me hand over to you, and then I guess you can hand it back to Harry to close off.
Thank you very much, Rian, and everyone on the call. We really appreciate you spending time with us. 3 hours really is a lot, but the matter, as you heard, is it's important. It's really important to us, and we value your comments and inputs, and we'll appreciate it if you do that in writing as well, so that it can, or they can, inform this policy going forward. Because as you know, the final draft policy will have to be presented back to the cabinet clusters before it goes back to cabinet for approval. So we need to make sure that we are sending a good document to cabinet, because who knows, they might ask us the questions that you have assisted us in answering. So we need your inputs. Thank you to Mr. Van Heesten, Eric, for hosting us once again. And I think I must also add that, Rihanna, there's also a dedicated session with Saboa on the 27th, scheduled for the 27th. And Who else are we meeting, Rihanna? Maybe you can indicate that. I think we have another
Yeah,
meeting
so
on
we
the
have
26th.
had a number of engagements with NEDLAC colleagues, because obviously, as the official kind of tripartite conversation, so there will be another session with NEDLAC on the 26th, and then we meet SABOA on the 27th. Yeah, so Chifiwa, thank you for that. Harry, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Rihanna and drafting team and Department of Transport for your trust in our Transport Forum. It's our privilege in sharing this important discussion and public participation. I think this is what we can call public participation, and Transport Forum is supposed involved. Ladies and gents, the documentation that we received from the drafting team will be uploaded to the server. Let's say within the next 2 hours, you'll all receive an email with some guidance, how to download the documents and take the way forward. The Transport Forum, yes, is very much available to help the process and support the process in terms of getting this important document finalized. So from the Transport Forum side, thank you very much. Thank you, Rihanna, for approaching us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to assisting you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Harry. We deeply appreciate the partnership with yourselves. So, colleagues, I think Mateta has raised a sentiment on there is no shortage of capacity in our country and willingness to actually transition and change from a very difficult history that we've evolved from, but to build a fundamentally different future for our children and their children. And that leadership role that Mateta talked about, I don't think depends on title and office. That leadership role means your ability to lead transition and transformation wherever you may find yourself. For so long, we've divided ourselves based on what mode of transport we run. For so long, we've divided ourselves based on which sphere of government we work in. For so long, we've divided ourselves between private sector and public sector. How different could our future be if we were co-creating and co-designing, even through really difficult conversations? A future that looks fundamentally different to our past. We hope that this policy, in some way or form, in its draft form, with all of your inputs and considerations, to our international guests who've taken the time out to join a session that they may never be impacted directly by. We appreciate your presence. To each of you who've taken a valuable 3 hours out of your life to sit with us in a Zoom room and debate. We deeply appreciate your insights, your inputs. We look forward to your comments, and we trust that these conversations will make it into the public domain for people who are too busy traveling on public transport, who are too busy trying to eke out an existence, whose lives will be fundamentally affected by what happens with this policy going forward. We trust that they too might have the opportunity to engage what sometimes feel like very technical arguments, but are ultimately about the quality of life of people. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a wonderful